My brother got caught stealing $400 from my wallet. My parents sat me down and made me apologize to him for leaving temptation around. He smirked the entire time. I didn't argue. I just moved out that weekend. A month later, $6,000 went missing from Dad's safe. My name's John. I'm 26, and I need to tell you about the day my parents made me apologize to my own brother for getting robbed. Yeah, you read that right. My brother stole $400 out of my wallet, got caught red-handed, and somehow I ended up being the one saying sorry. If that sounds insane, buckle up, because it gets so much worse. Let me back up and give you some context, because this story doesn't make sense without understanding the family dynamic I grew up in. I'm the oldest of two boys. My younger brother, Tyler, is 23 now, and he has been the golden child since the day he took his first breath. I'm not exaggerating. There are literally more photos of Tyler's first steps on the living room wall than there are of my entire childhood combined. I counted once when I was 16, which is either incredibly sad or incredibly petty, and honestly it might be both. Growing up, I was the quiet one. Got decent grades, stayed out of trouble, worked a part-time job at a hardware store starting at 15. Tyler was the charismatic one. Big smile, quick with a joke, knew exactly how to work a room. Teachers loved him even when he was turning in assignments 2 weeks late. My parents, especially my dad, thought Tyler hung the moon. My mom wasn't as obvious about it, but she had this way of always finding an excuse for whatever Tyler did, and I mean always. The kid could burn the house down, and she'd say he was just experimenting with thermodynamics. By the time I was 22, I'd graduated from community college with an associate's degree in accounting, which I know isn't exactly the stuff of legends, but I paid for it myself. Every cent. I was working full-time at a mid-sized firm in town and saving up to move out. Tyler, meanwhile, had dropped out of his second college attempt and was back home, playing video games 14 hours a day and somehow convincing my parents that he was finding himself. The guy was finding himself all right, finding himself on the couch every single day with a controller in one hand and a bag of chips in the other. Now here's where you need to understand the living situation. I was still at home at this point, not because I wanted to be, but because rent in our area is brutal and I was trying to save up a real cushion before I made the leap. I was paying my parents $500 a month for rent, which Tyler thought was hilarious because he paid exactly zero. I brought it up once at dinner and my dad said, and I quote, "Tyler's still getting on his feet. You're the responsible one, John. You understand." And Tyler just sat there eating his mashed potatoes with this little grin that I can still see when I close my eyes. I kept my savings in a lockbox in my room, but I also kept cash in my wallet for day-to-day stuff. I'd just gotten paid a bonus at work for landing a new client for $100, and I'd cashed it because I was planning to buy a new set of tires for my truck that weekend. I left my wallet on my dresser like I always did when I got home from work on a Friday night. Saturday morning, I went to grab it and the cash was gone. For $100, just vanished. My cards were still there, my ID was still there, but every bill was missing. My stomach dropped. I knew immediately. There was only one person in that house who would do something like that, and it wasn't the family dog. I walked downstairs and Tyler was sitting at the kitchen table eating cereal like nothing happened. I asked him straight up, "Did you take money from my wallet?" He didn't even flinch, just looked at me with those big innocent eyes he'd been perfecting since kindergarten and said, "What? No, why would I do that?" Here's the thing about Tyler. He's a decent liar, but he's not a great one. And I'd been watching him lie to our parents for 20 plus years, so I knew his tells. The way he scratched the back of his neck, the way he over-explained. So I said, "Empty your pockets." And you should have seen his face. For about half a second, the mask slipped, and I saw panic. Pure, undiluted panic. My mom walked in right then, asked what was going on, and I told her. Tyler stole $400 from my wallet. Tyler immediately went into performance mode. "I didn't steal anything, Mom. John's being paranoid." But here's where karma threw me a bone, because my dad had installed a security camera in the hallway 2 months earlier after some packages went missing from the porch. The camera covered the upstairs hallway, including the door to my room. I pulled up the footage on my phone right there at the kitchen table, and there it was, clear as day. 2:17 a.m., Tyler creeping into my room, wallet in hand 30 seconds later, rifling through it, pulling out the cash, and walking back to his room like he'd just grabbed a glass of water. My mom's face went white. Tyler's cereal spoon was frozen halfway to his mouth. My dad, who had wandered in during the replay, just stood there with his arms crossed. And I thought, finally, this is the moment where they see it. Where they see him for who he is. Where they stop making excuses and actually hold Tyler accountable for something in his miserable, coddled life. I was wrong. My dad told everyone to sit down in the living room. He said we needed to talk about this as a family. I figured that meant Tyler was about to get the lecture of a lifetime. Instead, my dad looked at me, and I'll never forget what he said. "John, you know your brother's been going through a tough time. Why would you leave that kind of cash just lying around where anyone could see it? That's like leaving a steak in front of a dog and getting mad when he eats it." He compared my brother to a dog, and somehow I was still the bad guy. My mom nodded along like this was the most reasonable thing she'd ever heard. She said Tyler was probably embarrassed and that I should understand how hard it is for him watching me succeed while he was still struggling to find his path. She actually used those words. Struggling to find his path. The guy stole from me while I was sleeping, and she made it sound like he was on some kind of spiritual journey. Then my dad said it. The thing that changed everything. "I think you owe your brother an apology, John, for putting him in that position." The room went dead silent. Tyler was sitting across from me on the love seat, and I watched his face go from nervous to confused to something I can only describe as smug. Because he realized, in real time, that he'd won again. That no matter what he did, our parents would bend reality to protect him. I looked at my mom. She wouldn't meet my eyes. I looked at my dad. He stared me down like he was daring me to argue. And Tyler? Tyler leaned back, crossed his arms, and smirked. Not a subtle smirk either. A full, teeth-showing, victory lap smirk. Something broke in me in that moment. Not like a dramatic movie scene where the music swells and the hero clenches their fist. It was quieter than that. It was like a rope that had been fraying for 26 years finally snapped, and all the weight it had been holding just dropped. I felt it in my chest. This hollow, numb emptiness that replaced every shred of hope I'd been holding onto that my parents would ever see me as equal to Tyler. So I looked at Tyler, and I said, "I'm sorry for leaving temptation around. It won't happen again." And I meant it, just not in the way any of them thought. I went back to my room after that little family tribunal and sat on the edge of my bed for probably 20 minutes just staring at the wall. I could hear Tyler downstairs laughing at something on his phone. My mom was clanking dishes around in the kitchen like everything was normal. My dad had already turned on the TV. The whole house had just moved on, like what happened was a weather event. Brief, unpleasant, already forgotten. But I hadn't moved on. Something had shifted inside me, and I could feel it settling into place like tumblers in a lock. I wasn't angry anymore. That's the part that surprised me. I'd spent most of my life being angry about the favoritism, about the double standards, about watching Tyler skate through life on charm and excuses while I clawed for every inch. But sitting there in my room that Saturday morning, the anger was gone. What replaced it was clarity. Cold, sharp, absolute clarity. I wasn't going to change them. I wasn't going to convince my parents to see what was right in front of their faces. I'd been trying to do that since I was 12 years old and found out Tyler had broken my PlayStation and my dad made me share his instead of replacing mine. That was 14 years of banging my head against a wall made of favoritism and denial, and all I had to show for it was a headache. So I made a decision. I was leaving. Not in a month. Not when I had the perfect amount saved up. Not when it was convenient. That weekend, I spent Saturday afternoon quietly making calls. My buddy Greg from work had mentioned a few weeks earlier that his roommate was moving out and he needed someone to split rent. I called him, asked if the room was still available, and he said yes. First and last month's rent plus a deposit came out to about $2,000, which I had in my lockbox. I told him I'd be there Monday. Then I started packing. I didn't make a show of it. I didn't slam doors or throw things into boxes with dramatic flair. I just methodically went through my room, separating what was mine from what belonged to the house, and putting everything into garbage bags and the 3 duffel bags I owned. It's kind of sobering how fast you can pack up 26 years of life when you're motivated. Took me about 4 hours. My mom noticed first. She came up to ask if I wanted dinner and saw the bags. Her face did this thing where it tried to land on the right emotion and couldn't pick one. "What are you doing?" she asked. I told her I was moving out. She laughed, like I'd told a joke. "Don't be dramatic, John. Over $400. And that's when I knew she still didn't get it. It was never about the $400. It was about sitting in that living room and being told to apologize to the person who robbed me. It was about a lifetime of being the one who had to be understanding, be patient, be the bigger person, while Tyler got to be a human tornado with no consequences. But I didn't say any of that. I just said, I found a place. I'm moving out tomorrow. She went and got my dad. He came upstairs with that look he always wore when he thought I was being unreasonable. This mixture of irritation and condescension that I'd been seeing since I was old enough to have my own opinions. Your mother says you're leaving, he said, like I'd announced I was joining a cult. I am. Over this. John, come on. Your brother made a mistake. We handled it. You made me apologize to him, Dad. Because you escalated it. You could have come to us privately instead of confronting him at the breakfast table. I almost laughed. Almost. Because the mental gymnastics required to turn my son caught my other son stealing from him into my son caused a scene was genuinely Olympic level. But I just kept packing. I'd learned a long time ago that arguing with my father was like trying to teach a brick wall to dance. Technically possible, but you're wasting everyone's time. Tyler showed up in my doorway about an hour later. He leaned against the frame with his arms crossed, watching me stuff clothes into a bag. You're seriously leaving? He asked, and there was something in his voice I hadn't expected. Not remorse, not exactly, but maybe the faintest recognition that he'd pushed something too far. Yep. Dude, it was $400. I was going to pay you back. I stopped packing and looked at him. Really looked at him. My little brother, who I'd taught to ride a bike, who I'd covered for when he snuck out in high school, who I'd driven to parties and picked up at 2 in the morning without telling our parents. No, you weren't, I said, and we both knew it was true. He shrugged and walked away. That was the extent of Tyler's attempt to make things right. A shrug. I moved out the next morning. My dad didn't help me carry anything. My mom stood in the kitchen doorway and told me I was making a huge mistake and that I'd come crawling back within a month. Tyler didn't even come downstairs. I loaded everything into my truck in 3 trips, drove to Greg's apartment, and started the next chapter of my life. The first few weeks were rough, I won't sugarcoat it. Greg's apartment was small, my room barely fit a twin mattress and a desk, and I was suddenly paying real rent and real utilities on top of the student loans I was still chipping away at. I ate a lot of rice and canned soup. I picked up a second gig doing freelance bookkeeping on weekends just to keep my head above water. But here's the thing nobody tells you about starting over. It's hard, but it's yours. Every dollar I earned went toward my life. Nobody was eating my food or stealing my money or making me feel guilty for existing. For the first time in 26 years, my home felt like my home. I went no contact with my family for the first 2 weeks, which was the longest I'd ever gone without talking to them. My mom called twice, left messages that started concerned and ended annoyed. My dad didn't call at all. Tyler sent me one text that said, "You're being ridiculous, bro," and I didn't respond. About 3 weeks after I moved out, I got a call from my mom. Her voice was different this time. Not angry, not dismissive. Worried. She said she needed to talk to me about something important and asked if I could come over for dinner on Sunday. I said no. She pushed. I said no again. She finally told me what was going on over the phone, and I wish I could say I was shocked, but I really wasn't. $6,000 was missing from my dad's safe. My dad kept cash in a fireproof safe in the master bedroom closet. It was where he stashed emergency funds, some insurance payout money, and cash he'd been slowly saving for a fishing boat he'd been talking about buying since I was in middle school. The safe had a combination lock, and according to my mom, only my dad knew the combination. Except that wasn't true, was it? Because Tyler had been living in that house with nothing but time and zero boundaries for years. And if there's one thing Tyler was good at, it was watching and waiting and taking what he wanted when nobody was looking. My mom swore up and down that Tyler denied it. Of course he did. She said my dad was looking into it and that they didn't want to jump to conclusions, which was parent code for, "We know exactly who did this, but we're not ready to face it." She asked me if I had any idea who could have done it. I almost choked on my own tongue. "Are you seriously asking me that?" I said, "You're asking the son who got forced to apologize for being robbed if he has any theories about who might have committed the second robbery?" She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "This is different, John. This is $6,000. I said, "So 400 wasn't enough to matter, but 6,000 is? Good to know there's a dollar amount where Tyler's behavior becomes a problem." She didn't have an answer for that. I told her I had to go. I hung up the phone, sat down on my secondhand couch, and I'll be honest with you guys, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt tired. Tired and sad for a family that couldn't see what was right in front of them until it cost them $6,000. The weeks after that phone call were a strange kind of quiet. I kept my distance from my family and focused on the only thing I had control over, which was my own life. And look, I'm not going to sit here and tell you I had some movie montage where I went from struggling to thriving overnight with an inspirational soundtrack playing in the background. Real life doesn't work that way. But things did start to shift, slowly at first, then all at once. At the accounting firm, I'd been grinding for about 4 years. Solid work, no drama. Always the first one in and one of the last to leave. My boss, a woman named Claire who was about as warm and fuzzy as a tax audit, had never been big on compliments. But about a month after I moved out, she called me into her office and told me she was recommending me for a senior associate position that had just opened up. I nearly swallowed my own tongue. "You've been steady, John," she said, which from Claire was basically a standing ovation. "We need someone who can manage the Qley account independently. I think that's you." The Qley account was one of our biggest clients, a regional chain of auto dealerships with complicated books and an owner who was notoriously difficult to deal with. Most people in the office avoided it like poison ivy. I saw it as an opportunity. If I could handle Qley, I could handle anything. I took the promotion. It came with a 20% raise, which felt like winning the lottery on my budget. I finally had enough breathing room to stop eating canned soup for every meal and start putting real money into savings again. Greg and I settled into a good routine at the apartment. He worked nights at a distribution center, so we barely overlapped, which honestly made us perfect roommates. I had the place to myself most evenings, and I spent that time studying for my CPA exam. Here's something I hadn't told anyone yet. I've been quietly working toward my CPA certification for the past year. It was the kind of thing that, in my old life at my parents' house, I never would have mentioned because Tyler would have made some joke about it, and my dad would have said something like, "Well, Tyler's got people skills, which are worth more than any certification." So I just kept it to myself and studied in silence. 3 nights a week, 2 hours a night, practice exams on weekends. It wasn't glamorous, but it was building something. About 2 months after I moved out, I got a text from an unknown number. It was Tyler. He'd apparently gotten a new phone, which probably meant he'd sold or lost the old one to pay off some debt or fund whatever his latest fixation was. The text said, "Hey man, things are rough at home. Dad's really mad. Can you call Mom? She's been crying." I stared at that message for a long time. There was a version of me that would have called immediately. The dutiful oldest son, the peacemaker, the one who always smoothed things over so the family could pretend everything was fine. That version of me would have driven over there, set everyone down, and tried to fix things. But that version of me was dead. He died in a living room on a Saturday morning while his brother smirked at him. I didn't respond to Tyler's text. Instead, I called my cousin Brady. Brady was a couple years older than me, and the only family member who'd ever acknowledged the favoritism without trying to minimize it. He lived about 2 hours away, but we'd always been close. I told him everything that had happened, from the $400 to the apology to the $6,000 from the safe. Brady listened without interrupting, which is one of his best qualities, and when I was done he said, "Man, I've been waiting for you to wake up since we were teenagers." That hit me harder than I expected, because he was right. Everyone around me had seen it. Cousins, aunts, family friends. They'd all seen how my parents treated Tyler versus how they treated me. I was the last one to stop making excuses for it. Brady became my anchor over the next few months. We talked every week, sometimes just shooting the breeze, sometimes about heavier stuff. He was the one who told me it was okay to grieve a family that was still alive, and I needed to hear that more than I realized. Around the 3-month mark of living on my own, I got some news through the family grapevine. My Aunt Diane, my mom's sister, called me out of the blue one evening. She said she'd talked to my mom and things at home were, in her words, falling apart. Tyler had gotten into some kind of trouble. Diane wasn't clear on the specifics, but it involved money. Apparently he'd borrowed cash from a friend of my dad's, a guy named Hank who owned a landscaping company, and never paid it back. Hank showed up at the house demanding the money, and my dad had to cover it. Another $3,000 gone. So let me do the math for you. $400 from my wallet, $6,000 from the safe, $3,000 owed to Hank. That's nearly 10 grand that Tyler had siphoned in about 4 months. And those were just the amounts people knew about. My dad, according to Diane, was finally starting to crack. He wasn't yelling, which was almost worse. He'd gone quiet. My mom was trying to hold everything together the way she always did, by pretending it wasn't as bad as it looked and deflecting blame onto anything except Tyler's actual behavior. Diane said my mom had even floated the theory that someone else might have taken the money from the safe. A repairman, maybe, or a house guest. Anyone but Tyler. I listened to Diane, thanked her for calling, and went back to studying for my CPA exam. Because here's the thing I'd finally learned. Their chaos wasn't my responsibility. It never had been. I'd just been programmed since birth to think it was. 4 months after moving out, I passed my CPA exam on the first attempt. I sat in my truck in the parking lot of the testing center and just breathed for a while. No one was there to celebrate with me, which was fine. Greg bought me a six-pack that night, and we watched basketball, and that was enough. Claire was thrilled. She fast-tracked my title change at the firm, and suddenly I was John the CPA, not John the associate. The Callaway account was running smoother than it ever had. The owner, this gruff old guy named Dale Callaway, actually called Claire to tell her I was the first accountant he hadn't wanted to fire. Coming from Dale, that was a Michelin star. I started dating a woman named Leah around this time. She was a nurse at the urgent care clinic near Greg's apartment. We met because I went in with a sprained wrist from a pickup basketball game, which is about as romantic as it sounds. She was funny and direct and didn't take any crap from anyone, and she had this way of looking at me when I talked that made me feel like what I was saying actually mattered. I hadn't felt that way around anyone in a long time. Leah knew bits and pieces of my family situation. I didn't dump it all on her at once, but she was perceptive enough to fill in the gaps. One night we were sitting on my tiny apartment balcony, and she said, "You know, for someone who got dealt a bad hand with his family, you turned out pretty solid." I told her it was because I'd stopped playing the game. She smiled and said, "Smart man." 5 months in, I was in the best shape of my life, mentally and financially. I had a career that was going somewhere, a relationship that felt healthy, a roommate who was actually a good friend, and for the first time in my life, peace. Not happiness necessarily, because I still carried the weight of what my family was, but peace, which is its own kind of freedom. And then my dad called. First time in 5 months. His voice sounded like it had aged 10 years. He said he needed to talk to me. Not about Tyler, not about the money, about something else, something bigger. He said, "Your grandfather left a will, John, and there's something in it you need to know about." My grandfather, Walter, passed away when I was 24. He was my dad's father, a retired electrician who lived alone in a small house about 40 minutes outside of town. Quiet guy, strong opinions, hands like leather from 50 years of honest work. He and my dad had a complicated relationship, mostly because Grandpa Walt wasn't the type to sugarcoat anything and my dad wasn't the type to hear criticism without taking it personally. But Grandpa Walt and I were close. Closer than most people in my family realized. When I was a teenager, I used to drive out to his place on weekends and help him with projects around the house. Replacing a porch rail, fixing the gutters, painting the shed. He'd pay me in cash and life advice, and honestly the advice was worth more. He was the one who told me to get my accounting degree. He was the one who told me that being the quiet one in a loud family didn't mean I was the weak one. When he died, there was a small funeral, and my dad handled the estate. At the time, we were told that Grandpa Walt didn't have much. The house was sold, and the proceeds went to cover some debts and medical bills from his final year. My dad said there was nothing left to distribute, and I had no reason to question it. Turns out, that wasn't entirely true. On the phone, my dad explained that Grandpa Walt had actually left a will with a lawyer, separate from the informal handling my dad had done with the estate. This lawyer, a guy named Trent Patterson, had been holding on to it and had only recently reached out to my dad because there was an asset that needed to be transferred. Specifically, a savings account. Grandpa Walt had a savings account with just over $42,000 in it. And according to his will, it was split in two. Half to my dad and half to me. Not Tyler. Not the grandchildren. Me by name. John Michael, his exact words in the document. My dad's voice was tight when he told me this. I could practically hear him grinding his teeth. He said, "Your grandfather wanted you to have $21,000, John. I need you to come sign some papers with the lawyer so we can release the funds." I didn't say anything for about 10 seconds. Not because I was processing the money, although $21,000 is nothing to sneeze at when you're living in a shoebox apartment eating off paper plates. I was processing the fact that Grandpa Walt, even from beyond the grave, had seen me. He'd seen what my parents refused to see, that I was the one who showed up, that I was the one who cared. I told my dad I'd contact the lawyer directly and hung up. The next day, I called Trent Patterson's office. He was a straightforward guy, mid-50s, the kind of small-town lawyer who kept things simple and expected you to do the same. He confirmed everything. The will was legitimate, properly witnessed, filed 2 years before Grandpa Walt's death. My share was $21,000 and change. He said he could have the paperwork ready within a week and that I just needed to come to his office to sign. Then he said something that made my ears perk up. Your father called me yesterday too. He asked if the will could be modified to split your share 3 ways, between you, him, and your brother. I let that sink in. My dad wanted to take a chunk of my inheritance and give part of it to Tyler. The same Tyler who had stolen nearly $10,000 from the family in the past few months. The same Tyler who had never visited Grandpa Walt, never helped with a single project, never even sent the man a birthday card. And my dad wanted to reward that with a cut of the money Grandpa Walt specifically left to me. Can he do that? I asked. Trent chuckled softly. No, the will is clear. Your grandfather named you specifically. Your father has no legal authority to alter the distribution. I thanked him and said I'd be in to sign that week. That night I sat down with Leah and told her everything. She listened the way she always did, calm and focused, asking a question here and there, but mostly just letting me talk. When I got to the part about my dad trying to redirect my inheritance to Tyler, she set down her coffee cup and said, John, you know what's going to happen when you sign those papers, right? They're going to come at you. She was right. I knew she was right. My parents would frame it as selfishness. Tyler would play the victim. There would be guilt trips and phone calls, and maybe even a family ambush disguised as a dinner invitation. The playbook was older than I was. So I decided to be ready. Not aggressive, not petty, but prepared. I called Brady that weekend and told him everything. He was quiet for a minute, and then he said, Your grandpa was the smartest guy in that family. He knew exactly what he was doing. I agreed. I went to Trent Patterson's office on a Wednesday afternoon, took a half day from work, drove out to his little brick building on Main Street, and signed the papers. $21,214. Deposited into my account within 5 business days. I sat in my truck afterward and called Grandpa Walt's old phone number out of habit. It was disconnected, obviously, but I whispered, Thank you, Grandpa, to nobody, and it felt like somebody heard it. The money went straight into savings. I didn't touch it. I didn't celebrate with it. It sat there like a foundation, quiet and solid, just like the man who left it to me. My dad called 3 days later. His tone had shifted from the previous call. Gone was the neutral, almost business-like delivery. This was the voice I knew best, the one that meant I'd failed to follow the script he'd written for me. Your brother is struggling, John. Really struggling. Your grandfather would have wanted you to help your family. Grandpa Walt left Tyler nothing, Dad. That was his choice. If he wanted Tyler to have money, he would have put Tyler's name in the will. He was an old man. He didn't know what Tyler was going through. He knew exactly what Tyler was going through. He just didn't reward it. Silence. Then, You're turning into someone I don't recognize. No, Dad. I'm turning into someone you never bothered to get to know. He hung up on me, and I was fine with that. Over the next 2 weeks, I started getting calls and texts from my mom, from Tyler, from my aunt on my dad's side, who barely knew me, but suddenly had strong opinions about family loyalty. The pressure campaign was in full swing. Tyler sent me a long message about how he was trying to change, and that he just needed a little help to get on his feet. My mom left a voicemail crying, saying I was tearing the family apart. But here's what none of them knew. I'd been talking to Trent Patterson about something else. Something that had come up during our meeting that he'd mentioned almost as an afterthought. My dad had been named executor of Grandpa Walt's estate. And in that role, he'd sold the house and claimed there were no remaining assets. But the savings account had existed at the time of the sale, which meant my dad had either known about the money and hidden it, or been negligent in his duties as executor. Trent said it wasn't necessarily criminal, but it was absolutely something that could be explored if I wanted to pursue it. I told him to hold that thought, not because I wanted to use it, but because I wanted to have it in my back pocket when the inevitable family confrontation came. And it was coming. My mom invited me to Sunday dinner. Specifically, she said, because Tyler had something he wanted to say to me. I knew what that meant. It was going to be a performance. Tyler would apologize, my parents would frame it as growth, and then they'd pivot to asking me to share the inheritance. I said yes. I told Leah what I was walking into. She offered to come, but I said no. This was something I needed to do alone. She squeezed my hand and said, "Just remember, you don't owe them anything. Not a dollar, not an apology, not a single second of your peace." I drove to my parents' house that Sunday with the calm of a man who had nothing left to lose and everything to protect. I pulled up to my parents' house at 5 o'clock on a Sunday evening. The house looked the same as it always had. Same faded blue siding, same cracked driveway, same basketball hoop that Tyler and I used to play on as kids. I walked in and the table was set. My mom had made pot roast, which was her go-to peace offering. The house smelled like garlic and gravy, and under any other circumstances, it would have been comforting. Tyler was sitting at the table already, wearing a button-down shirt I'd never seen before, which told me my mom had dressed him up for the occasion like a kid going to picture day. My dad was in his usual chair at the head of the table, arms crossed, face unreadable. We sat down. My mom served the food. We ate in silence for about 3 minutes, which in my family is an eternity. Then my dad cleared his throat and said, "Tyler has something he'd like to say." Tyler put down his fork, looked at me, and delivered what was clearly a rehearsed speech. "John, I know I messed up. I shouldn't have taken that money from your wallet, and I'm sorry. I've been going through a lot, and I wasn't thinking straight. I'm trying to be better, and I hope you can forgive me." It was word perfect, probably written by my mom. Tyler even managed to look a little emotional during the delivery, though I noticed he didn't mention the $6,000 from the safe or the $3,000 he owed Hank. Funny how the apology only covered the $400, the one with camera evidence. I said, "Thank you, Tyler. I appreciate you saying that." My mom beamed. My dad nodded, looking satisfied. And then came the pivot, right on schedule. "John," my mom said, folding her hands on the table like she was about to lead a prayer, "we've been thinking. Your grandfather's money. It was so generous of him to include you. But Tyler is really trying to turn things around, and we thought maybe, as a family, we could talk about helping him get a fresh start. Just a small portion of the inheritance, enough for first and last month's rent somewhere, maybe a certification course." There it was. The whole dinner, the apology, the button-down shirt, the pot roast. It was all a production. A 3-act play designed to soften me up and separate me from the money my grandfather left me because he knew, better than anyone, exactly who I was and exactly who Tyler wasn't. I took a breath. I looked at my mom, then my dad, then Tyler. And I spoke calmly. "No." My mom's face fell. My dad's jaw tightened. Tyler, to his credit, didn't look surprised. He'd probably expected this. The smirk wasn't there this time, though. Progress, I guess. "Let me explain something," I said, and my voice was steady. I'd practiced this in my head a dozen times, but the real thing felt different. Heavier. Grandpa Walt left that money to me. Not to the family. Not to Tyler. To me. He put my full name in the will, which means he thought about it. He made a deliberate choice. And I'm going to honor that choice because it's the only time in my entire life that someone in this family made a decision that said, "John matters." My mom started to interrupt, but I kept going. "Do you know why I think he left Tyler nothing? It's not because he didn't love Tyler. It's because he saw what you two refused to see. That giving Tyler money doesn't help him. It enables him. Every time Tyler takes and someone covers for him, he learns that taking works. You made me apologize for being robbed. You let $6,000 disappear from your safe, and you're still pretending it might have been a repairman. You paid off Hank $3,000 because Tyler borrowed money he never intended to return. That's nearly $10,000 in less than 6 months, and none of it, not a single dollar of it, has changed Tyler's behavior one bit." The table was dead silent. My mom's eyes were wet. My dad was staring at his plate. Tyler was looking at his hands. "I love you guys," I said. "I do. But I'm not going to fund the same cycle that broke this family. If Tyler wants to change, he can get a job, pay back what he owes, and build something for himself the way I did. Nobody helped me. Nobody covered for me. I worked at a hardware store at 15, put myself through school, earned every promotion, and passed my CPA exam. And I did all of that while being told, over and over, that Tyler was the one who needed support. My dad finally spoke. That's not fair, John. Really? Name one time you came to something for me. A school event, a work milestone, anything. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. My mom looked at him, then at me, and I could see it hitting her. Not all at once, not like a movie scene, but like water finding cracks in a wall. She was starting to see it, but I wasn't done yet. There's something else you should know, I said. When I met with Grandpa Walt's lawyer, he told me that you, Dad, as executor of the estate, claimed there were no remaining assets when you sold the house. But that savings account existed before the house was sold, which means you either knew about the money and hid it, or you didn't do your job as executor. My dad's face went pale, actually pale, like someone had pulled a plug and drained the color right out of him. I'm not going to pursue it legally, I said. I don't want to, but I need you to understand that I know. I know you tried to call the lawyer and have my share split 3 ways. I know you would have kept that money for me if you could have, and I need you to sit with that. Nobody spoke for what felt like 5 minutes. My mom was crying quietly. Tyler was staring at the wall. My dad was gripping the edge of the table like it was the only thing keeping him upright. I stood up. I'm not cutting you out of my life, I said, but things are going to be different. I'm not the kid who sits there and takes it anymore. I'm not the safety net for Tyler's bad decisions. And I'm not going to pretend that what happened in this family was normal, because it wasn't. I walked to the door. My mom followed me and grabbed my arm. John, please. I turned around and hugged her. I held her for a long time, and she held me back, and it was the most honest physical contact we'd had in years. I love you, Mom, I said, but love isn't enough if it only goes one direction. I drove home. Leah was waiting at my apartment with takeout and a movie queued up on the TV. She took one look at my face and said, "How'd it go?" I said, "I think they heard me." For the first time, I think they actually heard me. She handed me a container of lo mein and said, "Good, now eat." That was 3 months ago. Things aren't perfect. They probably never will be, but they're different. My mom calls me once a week now, and the conversations are real. She doesn't bring up Tyler's problems or ask me for money. She asks about my job, about Leah, about whether I've been eating enough. Small things, but honest things. My dad and I have talked twice. Both times were short and awkward, but he's trying. He sent me a text last week that said, "Proud of you for the CPA." 5 words. From my dad, that's a novel. Tyler got a job at a warehouse distribution center. Entry level, nothing glamorous, but he's showing up every day. He hasn't asked me for money since that dinner. We're not close, and I don't know if we ever will be, but we're civil. As for me, I'm doing well. Better than well. I got promoted again at the firm. Leah and I moved into a 1-bedroom together, and she lets me keep the thermostat at 68, which is basically love in its purest form. I put most of Grandpa Walt's money into savings and investments that I don't touch. Every time I see that balance, I think of him, of his calloused hands, and his quiet way of saying exactly what needed to be said. He didn't leave me money because I needed it. He left it to me because he wanted me to know that someone noticed. That someone saw the kid who showed up every weekend with work gloves and a good attitude, and thought, that one. That's the one who's going to be just fine. And you know what? He was right.